There comes a moment in every life when silence breaks, not yours, theirs. The ones who lied to your face while pretending they loved you. The ones who couldn't stand the weight of your honesty because it made their games impossible to play. You showed up real, vulnerable, brave. You loved without masks. You stood in truth even when it hurt. And they hid. Behind charm, behind excuses, behind their own fears. They mistook your kindness for weakness. They thought walking away from someone like you would never haunt them. But time has a voice. And karma, it speaks when you no longer need to. This is not a story of revenge. This is a story of truth. And truth has a way of catching up even to the ones who tried to outrun it. Because when you stand in authenticity, you don't lose. You plant seeds. And what they buried in silence is now blooming into justice. Authenticity requires immense strength. There's a reason why being real feels like a lonely path. It's not because you're doing something wrong, it's because most people are terrified of it. In a world where it's easier to fake smiles, rehearse charm, and pretend to care, standing in raw honesty becomes an act of rebellion. When you chose to be genuine, to speak your heart without filters, you weren't being naive. You were being stronger than they ever understood. They mistook your vulnerability for fragility, but they didn't see the inner discipline it takes to stay true in a world that rewards deception. You showed up without manipulation. You didn't play games to keep people close. You didn't wear different faces depending on who was watching. That choice wasn't simple. It cost you peace, relationships, and comfort, but it preserved something far greater, your integrity. Authenticity is not loud. It doesn't scream to be noticed. It sits quietly in the background, watching the world chase approval and power, and yet it holds more power than any pretense. You chose the harder route, the one where you had to confront your flaws instead of hiding them, the one where you had to endure the silence after the truth rather than the applause after a lie. That path requires a strength that cannot be measured in words. It requires endurance, and you had it. The people who couldn't meet you there, who couldn't mirror your depth or match your honesty, weren't stronger. They were weaker. Not because they didn't feel anything, but because they didn't have the courage to live it. They were afraid that if they stopped pretending, they would be exposed. But you were already standing in your light. You had nothing to hide. And that terrified them. You see, authenticity isn't about being perfect. It's about being anchored. While others drift with whatever is popular, safe, or convenient, the real ones, people like you, remain steady, even if that means standing alone. That kind of presence makes people uncomfortable. Because when someone lives without masks, it shines a light on everyone who's still wearing theirs. And instead of rising to meet your truth, they chose to run from it. The truth is, most people don't know what to do with someone real. They know how to respond to manipulation because it plays by the same rules they do. But honesty, vulnerability, that demands depth. It demands accountability. And if someone hasn't built that within themselves, they'll find every excuse to reject yours. But here's the beautiful irony: while they were running, hiding, avoiding, you were growing. You were strengthening muscles they didn't even know existed: emotional endurance, moral clarity, and spiritual resilience. You didn't collapse under the weight of rejection or silence. You transformed it into wisdom. And that wisdom now separates you from the ones who still depend on illusion just to feel safe. You didn't lose anything by being real. You refined your circle. You exposed who was never meant to walk beside you. And while it hurt deeply, it also revealed the level of strength you carry within. Because being real in a world like this doesn't mean you're weak. It means you've chosen truth over comfort, integrity over convenience. And no matter who walks away, that choice will always lead to something greater. Your authenticity is not just a trait. It's a force. And it's the reason why, in the end, life will always speak on your behalf louder than any lie ever told about you. Cowardice hides behind false appearances. Cowardice rarely looks the way you expect. It doesn't always show up in trembling hands or fleeing footsteps. More often it wears a smile. It compliments you while secretly resenting your strength. It avoids difficult conversations under the guise of keeping the peace. It pretends to care, but only when it's convenient. That's what you were dealing with, not bad luck, not miscommunication, but cowardice in disguise. They never had the courage to confront their own behavior. So instead, they found ways to mask it. They used charm as camouflage. They used silence as a weapon. They used your patience as their hiding place. And all the while, they wore the face of someone nice, someone good. But there's a difference between appearing kind and being whole. What you saw wasn't integrity, it was image control. It takes nothing to pretend. It takes everything to be real. They thought you were too much, too intense, too honest, too demanding of depth, but what they really meant was, you made me see myself. And they couldn't bear it. You held up a mirror to their soul, and instead of facing what was there, they blamed the mirror. You didn't push too hard, you just refused to live in shallowness. And for someone hiding from their own reflection, that's terrifying. Cowardice isn't just fear. It's the refusal to grow. It's the decision to remain small, even when life offers the chance to become more. They had every opportunity to rise to the occasion, to meet your sincerity with sincerity, to match your truth with truth, but they backed away. Not because you were too real, but because their identity was too wrapped up in pretending. Your authenticity threatened their illusion. And so they chose the easier route: distance, avoidance, silence. It's a lot simpler to disappear than it is to change. It's less painful to play the victim than to admit you were never ready to be loved by someone who doesn't play games. That's what cowards do. They retreat into roles, hoping no one will ask them to step beyond the surface. But deep down, they know what they ran from. And eventually that truth catches up. Their fake calm, their practiced indifference, their refusal to take responsibility, none of it was power. It was fear wearing a mask. And masks can only stay on for so long. At some point, the cracks start to show. The charm runs out. The silence becomes too loud. And the people who once seemed in control are revealed for what they are, lost, afraid, and unwilling to evolve. You didn't lose someone strong. You released someone scared. Scared of your clarity. Scared of your boundaries. Scared of what your presence exposed in them. That's not your burden to carry. You weren't too intense. You were just too real for someone who had never met themselves honestly. And instead of admitting that, they turned the blame onto you. But here's the truth they can't escape forever. Appearances can only protect you for so long. Eventually, the life they built on performance begins to collapse. And when it does, they'll remember you. Not with resentment, but with regret. Because deep down they knew you were offering them something true, and they lacked the courage to receive it. Their cowardice may have created distance, but your strength created clarity. You now know who can stand in the light with you, and who can only survive in the shadows. That's not loss, that's revelation. And as time unfolds, it becomes clear their fear was never about you. It was about the truth you represented, the truth they were never ready to live. Betrayal always reveals the betrayer first. Betrayal is not a reflection of your worth, it's a confession of theirs. It may feel like something was stolen from you, your peace, your trust, your sense of safety. But in reality, betrayal always says more about the one who delivers it than the one who receives it. When someone chooses to deceive, manipulate, or abandon a person who stood by them in truth, what they're exposing is not your weakness, it's their inability to stand in integrity. At first, it doesn't feel that way. The pain is sharp. The silence they leave behind is deafening. You question yourself. You go over every word, every choice, wondering if you were the reason they changed. But the truth is, betrayal doesn't happen because you gave too much. It happens because they were never capable of receiving what you gave in the first place. And instead of being honest about that, they turned their limitations into your burden. They took what was pure and mishandled it, thinking they'd never have to face the consequences. They thought walking away without explanation gave them power. They assumed silence would protect them from accountability. But the weight of betrayal doesn't disappear just because it's hidden. In fact, what they ran from grows louder over time. Because guilt doesn't die in silence, it thrives in it. You may never hear an apology. You may never get the answers your heart longs for. But don't confuse their lack of response with a lack of consequence. Life has a way of echoing truth back to those who try to silence it. The betrayal they thought would give them freedom becomes the chain they carry in their quietest moments. Because every act of betrayal leaves behind a residue, a spiritual fingerprint that doesn't fade. They think they've buried it, but they haven't. They've buried themselves under it. And here's what many never understand: betrayal doesn't just harm the one betrayed, it breaks something within the betrayer. A piece of their conscience, their dignity, their ability to look themselves in the mirror, it begins to erode. At first, they may seem fine, happy even, but that's surface level. That's performance. Behind the scenes, there's unrest, there's unease. Because somewhere inside, they know they violated something sacred. When you love someone in truth, when you support them through their confusion, when you give them the best of your loyalty, and they respond by pulling away, by choosing dishonesty over communication that isn't your failure, that's their fracture being revealed. And though it hurts, it's important to recognize that fracture didn't start with you. You just happened to be the mirror that made it impossible for them to pretend it didn't exist. In time, life exposes what people try to hide. Masks slip, patterns repeat, and suddenly the person who once painted themselves as the victim starts running into the same walls, the same lessons, the same regret. That's the cost of unhealed betrayal. It doesn't go away, it just follows them from one place to the next. Meanwhile, your healing becomes your protection. You stop chasing closure. You stop rewriting the past in your mind. And slowly you start to realize you were never meant to carry the weight of someone else's decision to betray you. You were meant to learn from it, rise through it, and become someone who can now spot inauthenticity before it gets too close. Betrayal may have changed you, but it didn't break you. It refined your boundaries. It taught you discernment. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded you of your own value, a value that never depended on someone else's ability to honor it. And while the betrayer may still be hiding behind new masks, new stories, new people deep inside, they know what they did. And whether they admit it or not, that truth speaks louder in their silence than any lie they ever told. Karma doesn't rush, but it never misses. There's a quiet order to life that doesn't ask for attention but never forgets balance. It's called karma, not some dramatic cosmic punishment, but a law of return. Not a hand that strikes in anger, but a mirror that reflects with time. And the thing about karma is this: it's never in a hurry, but it never forgets what was done, who did it, and what must be taught. When you were wronged, you may have wondered why life let it happen. You may have asked why people who manipulate, deceive, and walk away without remorse seem to continue untouched. But what you couldn't see was that while you were healing, something deeper was unfolding. Not just in your life, but in theirs. Because karma doesn't respond to actions alone, it responds to intent, to integrity, and to the unseen choices that shape a person's soul. They thought they got away with it. The silence, the avoidance, the dishonesty. They assumed that if they could avoid confrontation, they could also avoid consequence. But consequence doesn't arrive in the form of revenge. It shows up in patterns, in repeated failures, in the inability to find peace, in the slow realization that no matter how far they run, the same shadows follow. It's easy to think justice looks like someone getting what they gave. But karma works differently. It doesn't strike with the same weapon used against you. It strikes at the root. It goes after the false self they built to avoid the truth. And over time, it makes that self impossible to sustain. Their charm starts to feel hollow. Their control begins to slip. Their peace turns to restlessness. And the life they thought they built on solid ground starts to crack. You don't need to watch it happen. You don't need to witness their unraveling to know it's real. What matters is that you kept your hands clean, that you didn't lower yourself to their level. Because karma also remembers who stayed honest when betrayal was easier. It rewards those who chose healing over retaliation, growth over bitterness, peace over petty wars. They didn't break you, they revealed you. And while they were hiding from accountability, you were doing the inner work. You faced the hurt. You processed the grief. You rebuilt. And that rebuilding, slow and painful as it may have been, gave you something far more powerful than anything they tried to take: alignment with truth. Meanwhile, Karma has a way of speaking in whispers. At first, it's just discomfort, a conversation that haunts them, a memory that won't let go. Then it becomes patterns, relationships that don't work, a sense of isolation they can't explain, and eventually becomes clarity. They begin to see the connection between who they were and what they're experiencing. That's the true weight of karma, the slow, undeniable realization that they weren't the victim of circumstance. They were the architect of their own regret. No one escapes the lessons they refuse to learn. And if someone chooses deceit over truth, betrayal over loyalty, image over substance, then life in its patient but precise way will bring that person face to face with themselves. That's not vengeance, that's restoration. And you don't need to wait for their fall to feel whole. You're already rising. Because karma's greatest gift to you isn't their regret, it's your freedom. It's knowing that while they were trapped in the illusion of escape, you were walking steadily into peace, into clarity, into a life where truth no longer costs you pain but delivers you purpose. Karma doesn't forget, but more importantly, it doesn't miss. Not because it wants to punish, but because it exists to teach. And everyone eventually will sit in the classroom of their own choices. Your healing is the Loudest justice. There is a kind of justice that doesn't make noise. It doesn't come with applause or recognition. It doesn't look like revenge, and it doesn't wait for an audience. It comes quietly, often slowly, through the process of healing. The kind of healing that rebuilds your soul after it's been torn by betrayal. The kind of healing that strengthens you in silence while the world wonders how you're still standing. That kind of healing is not weakness, it is justice. Why? Because nothing unsettles those who harmed you more than seeing you rise without them. Nothing speaks louder than your peace in a life they once tried to destabilize. Your healing becomes the evidence not just of your strength, but of their failure to break you. They may have wounded you. They may have watched you bleed and pretended not to see. But what they underestimated was your resilience, your ability to take that pain and turn it into purpose. Healing doesn't begin with feeling better. It begins with facing what hurt you, with looking directly at the lies, the manipulation, the abandonment, and refusing to become like the ones who caused it. It's a decision you make again and again, to stay open, to stay kind, to stay true, not because it's easy, but because it's right. And in a world where bitterness is often easier than integrity, that choice is revolutionary. When you begin to heal, your energy changes. You no longer chase explanations from people committed to misunderstanding you. You stop shrinking yourself just to keep others comfortable. You start drawing boundaries not to punish anyone, but to protect the peace you fought so hard to earn. And slowly, without even trying, your life starts to reflect the clarity within you. The people who once tried to silence your voice now watch as others seek your wisdom. The ones who ghosted you now see you surrounded by those who value your presence. The ones who lied about you now face a truth they can't escape. You've outgrown their narrative. And that's the deepest justice of all, becoming someone so whole that their absence doesn't leave a hole. This healing journey isn't glamorous. It's messy. It's lonely. It's filled with nights where the weight of unspoken pain threatens to crush you. But it's also where your power is born. Because every tear that didn't get a response, every truth you had to carry alone, became a brick in the foundation of your strength. And now that strength is unshakable, not because you never fell, but because you kept getting back up. Let them say what they will. Let them rewrite the story to suit their guilt. Your healing speaks louder than their words ever could. They can craft whatever image helps them sleep at night, but deep down they know the truth. They know who was real. They know who stood by them in truth. And they know that they lost something they'll never be able to replace. Time has a way of revealing what people tried to hide. Eventually, the masks fall. The truth seeps through. And the people who seemed untouchable start to unravel, not because you wanted it, but because it was always inevitable. But by the time that happens, you're no longer waiting for justice, you're living it. Healing shifts your focus. It teaches you that not everyone is meant to understand you. That closure doesn't always come in the form of an apology. That sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away with your soul intact. And every step you take in that direction, away from their chaos toward your peace, is a statement louder than any confrontation. You begin to realize that you don't need revenge. You don't need them to feel your pain because you're no longer defined by it. You've risen above it. And that elevation, that calm, unbothered, healed version of you is what they never expected. They thought their actions would leave you broken. Instead, they left you wiser, stronger, untouchable. There's nothing more disarming to someone who tried to tear you down than watching you thrive without bitterness. Not pretending to be fine, truly being fine. No longer seeking closure, no longer rehearsing what you'd say if they came back. Just living, breathing. At peace, that's justice. That's what makes them sit in silence with the weight of their own choices. Your healing isn't just personal, it's spiritual. It's what lifts you above the need for retaliation. It's what aligns you with truth so deeply that you can spot dishonesty before it even speaks. That level of awareness is a gift paid for by pain, but it's a gift all the same. It keeps you from going back to what once broke you. It protects your future from the patterns of your past. And perhaps most powerfully, your healing helps others. When people see that you endured betrayal and still kept your heart open, when they hear your story and realize they're not alone, that's impact. That's legacy. You didn't just survive, you became a source of light for those still walking through the dark. That's the loudest justice of all. So don't look back to see if they're watching. Don't wait for the moment they finally feel what they put you through. That's not your path anymore. Your path is forward. It's higher, it's quieter, maybe, but it's richer, deeper, truer. You no longer need them to see what they lost because you know what you found. You found yourself. You found peace. You found freedom that doesn't depend on anyone else's apology. And that is the justice they never saw coming.